It's the Ask JP podcast with jpmorrell. Now, let's start the show. Here's JP.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ask JP podcast. We're talking about the issue today. I'm so excited to have my good friend Lynda with us today. We're going to talk about one of many discussions we'll be having about kind of like the current state or lack thereof of the Democratic Party and kind of how we got to where we are today, how we got to the possibly most embarrassing. I mean, Lynda and I could talk about it with Monet, but like, I think this is probably the most embarrassing cycle we've ever had in my, I'm 45, been paying attention for like 30 years. In the 30 years in which I can remember elections, this is the most embarrassing cycle we've ever had, like just across the board. And I mean, for a variety of reasons, but we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about it. We were talking so much before we started recording, so now we're actually going to start talking on the record, but I think maybe a good place to start, Lynda, might be giving people a background on how long you've been working within the party to kind of let them understand because you really understand the bones of the party more so than many people that are currently in it. So why don't we start there?
Right. So I started political life in the Obama campaign. I was not involved in the Louisiana Democratic Party at all. The first 4 years of that. It was really 2012 when I started to understand. A lot of people who came to politics through the Obama campaign were not establishment party people, right? So I didn't know anything about it, but I started to learn more about it. I ran for the local DPEC, Orleans Parish DPEC,
right,
in 2012 and got on the DPEC there and was secretary for them. So I did that. 2013, I went to work for the state party for 3 years. So 2013, 2014 cycle with Mary Landrieu, 2015 cycle with John Bel Edwards. And the other space I guess I've worked that people locally would know about is the Independent Women's Organization. I was president there for 4 years, but have been on the board for, over a decade now. So worked on a lot of local campaigns, statewide races, unanimous jury coalition, which we talked about on my podcast when you were gracious enough to come on. So, so I've got a lot of different experiences around the party, but I think you're mostly saying that there were those 3 years when I really actually worked at the state party. And then I actually did work on the coordinated campaign again for John Bell in 2019. So that was through the party as well.
It's super interesting because I think that something that I find very interesting, and Monet and I are kind of going through, we're trying to engage voters who were Obama voters but didn't come back. Because what I am constantly telling people is that, and you speak to it, because I mean, obviously you were someone who got really engaged with the Obama campaign. Something I've tried to explain to Bill, because the first thing I heard after everything went south is, well, voters let Sean Wilson down. That was the whole thing. Oh, voters. And the thing I said is, let's be very clear. The Democratic Party let voters down, because when it comes to getting people to turn out and vote, you have to have a campaign, a platform, and a message that motivates them to vote. Sure. And what I find interesting when I look at just the cycle of elections and voting, the Obama races were the high point. And I say that because even when Hillary ran against Donald Trump, our turnout for Democrats was lower than it should have been.
Okay.
And it's been kind of on a downward trajectory. And I think part of that's because as a state party, not speaking of candidate Hillary Clinton, but as a state party, we do not do enough to own the fact we're Democrats or push democratic principles. And by that, I mean that like, it's almost like as a party, we don't know who we are. And I say that because like when I was in the Senate, what I found so unusual is that we would have issues that I believe are platform issues. And one of them would be like LGBTQ plus queer community. That seems to be like, generally speaking, even Governor Edwards stuck that as a singular platform issue. Yet, every time there's a vote, a crap load of Democrats vote the other way. Every time.
Right.
And the messaging that sends to Democrats, which is demoralizing, is that, well, is this a party issue? Is it just an issue like, I mean, the challenge we have, and I'd love for you to speak to this, is that as a party in Louisiana, we've always believed big tent, from my perspective as someone who's not been in the party politics and the party mechanism, and you have been, big tent means don't offend anyone to leave. Sort of like we have the party is pro-choice, and I say it with a question in my head because it is, but we don't want to say we're that, because then the pro-life Democrats who are kind of on the fence might jump off. And it's like we have this weird dance we do, whereas Republicans, better or worse, they have these are the tentpole issues of our party. If you're in our tent, you're for these things.
Right.
And on one hand, as Democrats, we don't want to have a tent that's that defined, but we don't have a tent at all at this point. It's like a field with like a loose fence with like holes in it. And it's sort of like you can wander into the field, you can wander out of the field. But the problem is that when you don't have those pillars of something, it just makes people, I feel like, as someone who's trying to motivate myself to get more engaged with the state party at this point, because it's all a shit show, that's kind of where you have to start. Like, we have to define who we are, because politics 101 is that if you don't define yourself, you will let your opponent define you. And you saw in Mary's race, I mean, it goes back to Don Craven's race when he ran for Congress against Bustani years ago. When we don't define ourselves, I mean, Mary was what do we call it? A South Louisiana pro-choicer, which meant she was softly pro-life. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that even using that kind of logic, because the party as a state hadn't defined itself, they took Northeast liberalism and just stamped it on her face. And everyone's kind of like, well, that's who she is. Right. And because as a party, we don't define what our Democrats are. Every race, no matter what you think you are, we just let people. I don't know. I'm rambling, Lynda. Please.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot in there. So first of all, we do have nationally, we have a party platform. Right. We get together every 4 years and hash it out. And what do we care about, right? So we start with that. Now, there are some Democrats in Louisiana who are conservative Democrats still. Are they holdovers? Are they really Republicans that still call themselves Democrats? That's a good question, since there has been that sort of shift of the conservatives into, we've sorted, right? We've sorted, right. Big sort, the conservatives have gone to the Republican Party. So are they voting Democrat consistently? There's questions, but I mean, I've heard conservative Democrats say shouldn't have abortion in the platform. You know, there are certainly conservative Democrats who don't think we should support LGBTQ communities. So it's an interesting question, but we have a national platform.
And I fully admit that. I mean, honestly, and when they had this conversation right after the Ohio constitutional amendment, mm-hmm. I feel like when it comes to an abortion platform issue in a conservative state, they really threaded the needle, in that they said, this is the position we're going to take. It is our pro-choice position, though it does have language that is attractive to moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, in that they didn't say, they defined it with viability, defined the weeks. They kind of threaded this kind of weird needle, which is, I think, part of why it passed the way it did. And I feel like part of the problem is that when we have a national platform, but the state party kind of runs from the national platform, like the state party does not acknowledge. In fact, I can tell you that it's been a struggle from my perspective, which is why I've never really gotten engaged with the state party, that we acknowledge we're a Democratic party in like the sphere of state parties. But when it comes to like taking party positions on issues, like, for example, like, and this is a great point for Monet to jump in, I think this is why young voters don't show up to vote Democrat. Because when you don't take a position on things like queer rights, we know that is a winning issue for younger voters. On abortion, even whether it's we're going to draw the line and say viability 23 weeks. I think that's what Ohio said, 23, 22 weeks. But drawing the line somewhere and saying, we believe that this is the appropriate compromise, what the hell you want to call it, saying something differentiates you from the people who are saying no exceptions. And when we don't do that, and when I speak to like my nieces and nephews who are 18, 19, 20, 22-year-olds, they're going, what's the damn point? If I vote for this Democrat who believes the same stuff the Republicans do, then why does it matter if I show up?
They're not wrong. And, part of it is you have to give for particular young people. And again, I'm going to pitch to you in 2 seconds, Monet. But
Monet's the person.
You have to give young people, you have to give any voter, but young people in particular, I would say, a reason to want to belong to your party and a party that actually excites them, right? A platform that excites them, a reason to vote that they're excited about. Jump in, Monet.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't meet anyone my age whose main issue is like fiscal stuff or there's no 23-year-old that's talking about tort reform. Sorry to the one like 23-year-old in Louisiana that is concerned about tort reform, but it is LGBTQ issues, social issues like abortion. And I think this was kind of touched upon earlier. A lot of people talk about party loyalty and what that means. And what I find myself like screaming from the rooftops is young people don't have any party loyalty whatsoever. The people that are entering the voting generation are post 9/11, seeing total mismanagement and like a moral quandary in politics. And so it's like I don't feel obligated to belong to a party that doesn't serve me. And I remember, Lynda, when you ran against Katie, one of the issues was abortion because you took that position in your platform. And I mean, after Katie won the seat in, what was that, 2020? I switched my party to independent because young people don't feel the need to stick their guns to a party that won't stick their guns to them.
I mean, I say this, and you're like the perfect person for it because obviously you worked the Obama campaign, but it's like going back to the governor's race, it is our responsibility as politicians, if you want to get elected, to inspire hope.
Yeah.
And I say that because like I will say, like in my campaign, like when the moment we ran, the first ad we ran was aspirational. Like we can be better as a city.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
When you get people motivated to say, finally, someone who wants to do something, that makes people want to vote for you. Like Obama's entire message was hope. Mm-hmm. And that is why people from across a huge sphere of different backgrounds were like, okay, this guy saying we can do better. I want to be on this train to do better. The challenge we've had as a party is across the United States, obviously, I think that's probably how Trump got elected, is that when you run campaigns saying the other guy's really bad, you have to come vote to stop the other guy.
Yeah.
That shit does not work. It didn't work against Trump. It didn't work against Jeff Landry because literally that was the messaging of both the Democratic candidate and all the Republicans. Don't vote for Jeff Landry. And while you're running this campaign of don't vote for Jeff Landry, this dude's running positive spots on black radio, which is why he got 12%, 70% of the black vote, because he's running hope and change. He's taking the playbook we used and he's running it. And when I heard that line from people that, the party failed Sean, and I was like, no, the party failed the voters because we did not present candidates from the lowest offices up. We did not have a platform that said, this is where the state is. This is where we all want to go. Mm-hmm. Vote Democrat, and here's where we'll go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And not just young people. When I talk to people my age, I'm 45 to 35, the demographic everybody wants. They were like, what's the damn point? Like, I mean, they're kind of like, I mean, if I don't feel motivated to go vote, and it's not the whole like BS about there's a barbecue that day or there's some kind of like silly shit going on in your life so you don't vote. People who didn't vote in the governor's race, many I know, consciously said, I don't see a point. Some of them said, well, maybe I'll be motivated in the runoff. Well, that didn't happen. Yeah. But many just said, I don't feel like there's enough difference between these two candidates to engage me to feel like things will be different. And to Monet's point, when it comes to social issues like queer rights, abortion, whatever, I would say, and I don't say a lot ill about John Bell, John Bell's position on abortion did a lot to erode a lot of people's support for the party if that was their issue. That's just it's part of what got him elected, and I don't begrudge him that. But I think for the Monet independent voter now, I think for a lot of people who are like, I need the party to represent the things that are the pillars that are important to me. When your standard bearer doesn't hold that position as your position, it didn't hurt him necessarily being the governor. It definitely hurt Sean because I feel like Sean didn't really differ. I mean, if his position was different, and I believe talking to him, it was, he didn't go hard into how different it was or popularize that his position was a departure from the previous Democratic candidate.
In a post-Dobbs America, and even in post-Dobbs Louisiana, I'm not sure that John Bell gets elected like he did in 2015, right? Like, I think the votership has changed, or the electorate, because of that. People look at that issue differently, and we certainly have enough polling in the state now. There have been a couple recently that show voters understand the nuances. It's not just two polar ends. It's not just your pro-life or anti-abortion, pro-choice, pro-abortion rights, whichever terms you're using. Those are not the only two ways to look at the issue. There's a whole lot of gray. And I think the Democratic Party should learn how to message differently on that. I think we have a lot of folks who could tell us how to do that better. You know, Lift Louisiana is a great resource. I think if the party would engage with those resources that they have available to them to learn how to message better on that, we certainly could. And we could then draw clear contrasts, which, you know, campaigns are all about contrasts. If you could truly contrast yourself to, this is what I'm offering you that the opponent isn't, I think that would benefit Democratic candidates.
I totally agree about being in post-Dobbs, because I think, you know, the difference is shit got real afterwards. You know, it's like it became, you know, pre-Dobbs, it was kind of like this almost philosophical argument about abortion rights. But post-Dobbs, it's like, oh, if you're pregnant and you want to get an abortion, you have to book flight tickets, train tickets. You have to get a stay somewhere. Like, it became very real very quickly, to your point. And, you know, someone who's been involved at the Dem Party since the Obama years, how do you see the land has shifted over time? How do you think we've gotten from that place of hope in 2008 to where we are now in 2023?
You know, a lot of things have shifted. We've been through a pandemic. I think that's hard for folks to have maintained some hope. But the state has also, you know, the disasters we've lived through, the climate changes that are coming, there are a lot of spaces now where I think people have this sense of sort of dread and worry. And so you do need candidates, I think, who are going to be able to offer the uplift and the, you know, I'll put Devontae Lewis up as a candidate who had successfully kind of posed that hope point where taking the issues of these are problems we're having in our state, but here's the hope for it. And I think those opportunities are there. And, to your point, JP, I think the party can facilitate that better.
I mean, right. I think, and Devon is a good lead in, because one of the things that really is kind of driving me to get potentially more involved in the party itself is the amount of Democrat on Democrat violence this cycle was insane. I mean, and I'll say this unequivocally, more money was spent by the Democratic Party trying to unseat other Democrats than on getting Sean Wilson elected.
Yeah.
I mean, more money was spent. You had the chair of the party recruiting people to run against her political enemies in Democratic races, runoffs where the party chair lost all of her attempts to unseat people.
Yep.
We had a jacked up race in Plaquemines where we actually had a pickup seat last cycle. We lost because the politics were split. You had the party fighting the House caucus over an incumbent Democrat seat, which we lost to a Republican, which should have been an easy race, because the challenge was had the incumbent had just his Republican opponent in a primary, you probably would have won with turnout. But when you put him in a runoff with a well-funded Republican with split backing, he lost. And whether you like him or not as a person, on the issues that are important to us, like the queer rights issue, he voted the right way every time.
Oh, yeah.
I don't understand as a party, how in the hell, when you're on your back foot, do you waste money and time and resources trying to take out incumbents? I don't understand that.
Defend it by saying, oh, that's a function of gerrymandering, right? Because of the districting process. We're going to see, there's not enough seats where we can run Democrats against Republicans. So all the fighting is going to be in these blue seats. Right. I just don't buy that. And it just seems like a faulty argument from jump for me. If you're already struggling with a Republican majority, go find those flippable districts. Go find the districts like you were just talking about, where you can get a Democrat elected and dump a bunch of money in there. You could actually impact those local races.
Yeah, my grandma actually lives in Plaquemines Parish. And so I was able to see somewhat from the outside how that race was going. And the Democratic Party's backed candidate, interestingly enough, I only saw, not that signs mean anything for the people at home. Signs do not mean anything.
No, they mean nothing.
But it does show where you're putting your money and where you're spending it. And the Democratic Party's candidate, I saw most of her signs in the Orleans Parish part of that district. In Plaquemines Parish, I maybe saw one or two Cormier signs, the incumbent, but the rest were the Republican challenger. I mean, and they are organized very well. My grandmother is a member of the Republican Women's of Plaquemines Parish Club. Shout out to them. They meet monthly. Lieutenant Governor Nungesser's wife, I believe, is in the club. Like, they're organized.
Yeah.
And we're just not seeing it here.
And I mean, it's so frustrating, because it's like, this is why I think, from my perspective, when I talk to other people in other states and their parties, and you would know this better because you were in the apparatus, that's what makes it hard when you have a strong candidate and the state party goes looking for money. They go, well, you guys are kind of a hot mess.
Yeah.
I mean, we're known for being a hot mess. So it's like, I really struggle. I mean, honestly, I remember when Walt and I were still in the house. This is like years ago. This was like 2006. Even then, when Blanco was still, when he was coming in, I had been there one term. Blanco was leaving and Jindal was coming in. And we both survived the Jindal years, the whole 8 years of awful Jindal. And even as we transitioned out of Jindal, what people didn't realize is that part of what made Jindal lay the stage for John Bell was that he literally checked every box for the worst case scenario Democrats had said, if you let a Republican fiscal hawk, if that dog catches the car. And it really created an environment where people were like, it wasn't so much a hope and change as we thought we gave this guy the keys to the car and he drove it off a ditch.
Right.
So they were looking for a totally different driver. And the challenge you have is that John Bell drove the car okay for a couple of years. And when this election came up, everyone was like, well, it's like they had amnesia of what things were like before Governor Edwards. They forgot about the fact we had $1 billion deficit. They forgot about the fact we had to raise the sale tax. All these different things, which in a few months, the next year, are all going to happen over again because the sales tax falls off. We're going to be back in a fiscal cliff, and it's going to be another cycle. And the thing is that there was it was so frustrating to watch the entire scenario play out, in that there's always been this weird assumption by the Democratic Party that when we put up our candidate, the young people and the blacks, they're going to show up and vote for our candidate. That's literally the assumption every time. That is because nationally and locally, those are the people that make a Democratic candidate viable.
Right.
And I think what this cycle showed us is we have taken these demographics for granted for so long that we have assumed you put a D behind someone's name, these people are going to show up no matter what, and they're going to rescue the party in these difficult races or make it competitive.
So there's two pieces, right? You've got the drawing the contrast, which you talked about John Bell's race, and so John Bell was chair of the House Democratic Caucus. We also had a state party at the time. Both of those folks were hitting Jindal hard throughout his term, right? You had Democratic Party and the House Democratic Caucus pounding Jindal and essentially running John Bell against Jindal as much as he was running against the other Republican governor's candidates. So that was one piece. But you've also then, when you talk about Black voters and young voters, you've got to have both the message that they're receiving and the mobilization, right? So that's the second piece of it. If you're not reaching the voters and telling them to vote and reminding them of why it's important they vote, and look, here's the contrast. Here's the two people we're dealing with. Now you've got to go do something about it and make your voice heard about it. It kind of requires all of that. And look, Landry ran whatever moderate campaign he ran this year. We knew he was running. They had several lead up years that they could have been pounding him as attorney general and could have been dinging him up for a long time. And who was doing that?
No one. I mean, to your point, I mean, it's like, that is like politics 101. If you know, and I mean, that's also part of our problem, in that we should have had a John Bell heir running a year and a half out from when the race started.
That too. Drawing
that contrast, literally being there, like just like blowing Jeff Landry's head off every time he spoke and did something crazy. Instead, you had a disorganized party. There was no effort. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Jeff Landry, as a Republican attorney general, was part of the very smallish group that was part of the Dobbs challenge. Like, he was in the middle of it. And because the party at the state level is so terrified to kind of like get into that lane, they didn't draw that contrast, though. They didn't say, hey, the person who says no exceptions, rape and incest, the person who says, I mean, God, Lynda, there was a bill, and Monet gets me tired of talking about it was Austin Badon's bill, the Jeff Landry supporter. There was a bill Jeff Landry and Austin both supported that said that if you are a woman and you get into a horrific accident where you are comatose or dead, you're a vegetable, and you're pregnant, the baby has to be brought to term, which, by the way, no baby has ever survived in a dead body. It's literally not biologically possible, but it was this horrendous bill. It happened right after the state of Texas had that challenge and lost, where they tried to do the same thing. And that Supreme Court was like, nah, this is gross. Only Louisiana would say, the entire nation's outraged, hold my beer, we're now going to pass a law doing that. The fact that when that bill came up to the Senate, I remember distinctly, came over, it was like damn near unanimous out the House. Several Democrats, of course, voted for it because they're all like pro-life Democrats. And it gets to the Senate, and I'm arguing against, I forget who was carrying the bill, somebody randomly, but Gerald Long, who was a Republican Baptist preacher, held up the bill with me because he said this really violates families' rights to privacy to decide what to do with their damaged, deceased person.
Right.
And a woman who doesn't even know she's pregnant, who dies, could be brought to term as an incubator. And he held that bill up with me for about a week or two, and they eventually changed it so that it met the viability requirement. Because originally it was conception. It got to 22 weeks. I still voted against it, but the point is, the original bill was such a shock to the conscience. A Baptist preacher was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things where that should have been an ad. That should have been an ad. Jeff Landry supports that if your daughter doesn't know she's pregnant and dies in a car wreck, the state of Louisiana is going to attach her to some wires to be an incubator to make a dead baby, and you can't do a damn thing about it. That's the ad. Mm-hmm. Like there are things he did that were so far out of the pale of what is morally acceptable. I mean, we've seen the polling, Lynda. I mean, when it comes to rape and incest exceptions, everyone is for them. Like, it is not even like and the fact the party wouldn't even make that an ad, wouldn't even say, Sean Wilson supports someone's right to choose. Jeff Landry thinks that if your daughter or wife or grandchild is raped or abused by a relative, they have to have that baby. And by the way, he also doesn't believe the state should pay for him or take care of the baby. Like, but the party is so paralyzed by it's just frustrating because it's like, if I hate doing Hamilton lines, my son's name's Alexander, I can't help, but
do it.
If we stand for nothing, what do we fall for? That is the Democratic Party of the state of Louisiana. They stand for absolutely nothing. And like you said, you can just borrow the national platform, tweak it, or say, just stand for something. Because I can tell you, even when I was in the Senate and the House and we talked about what Democratic principles were, it's like everyone was like, shh, we don't want anybody to hear we're talking about pro-life stuff, pro-choice stuff too much. Shh, we don't want to talk about, we all love gay people. We don't want to really make that an issue. And it's like, I think we've done such a good job of not making it an issue. People like Monet are like, well, shit, if you're essentially the same party as the Republicans, why does it matter?
Yeah, if you don't support abortion, you are essentially a Republican to me, in my mind. That is how my mind works. Full disclosure. I don't see the difference.
So do you give any credence to this idea that the party is meant to be ineffective? Like that was part of the plan for them to be ineffective? I mean, there's folks who call her a Republican, and I don't think that she's a Republican. I don't believe that, but
I think that we came from a chair, Karen, who was very, very progressive. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a lot of tension between a lot of the blue dog Democrats, that her progressiveness is what led to some erosion within the party of support. And I think, if anything, what we saw this cycle is that being too progressive was not the party's problem. The party's problem, the underlying problem is disorganized, it's without a platform, and it's an executive committee and a board that kind of exists to stay an executive committee and a board. They're almost like
in a war room on election day.
But the one thing you should always be aware of with politicians is it's why everybody hates Congress. Once you get elected and your goal is to stay elected, you stop doing your job.
Yeah.
The Democratic Party is full of people who want to stay elected so they can go to the national convention every 4 years. And they're not people who really want to move. There hasn't been leadership that's purely dedicated to the Democratic Party being successful in Louisiana. That's why I said, like, when I go back to that Ohio question, if you really are a party that's trying to create messaging that is going to have a compromise to build a coalition, you do what Ohio did. Ohio said, listen, we're not going to put on the ballot that abortions of any type are absolutely legal, because that is not the coalition to win this constitutional amendment. They chose a position of, we're going to take viable, we're going to take where it was pre-Dobbs and say, this is the line we're going to stay on. And they create a coalition in friggin' Ohio to not only pass an amendment, but to kill a confusing attempt a month earlier to kill the amendment. I mean, that is the amount of discipline and messaging and sophisticated ability to organize. They pulled out every damn trick possible to kill that thing.
That's right.
If the party wants to be a Southern Democratic Party and that's what they're pick a spot. Just say, you know what we're going to say? We're going to say that because we've polled our party. And you could poll the entire Democrats in the state. I guarantee if you polled them, even in the most cheeriest, like, worst case scenario, you're going to find even the more conservative Democrats probably fall around the pre-Dobbs. Probably over here somewhere in the we don't support third trimester abortions, which don't fucking happen, but it's Oldsboro thing. But that line is a line we're willing to die on. Say you're stand for something and build from it. Instead, we're just kind of like we're a big tent. We want to make sure the people who are like quasi Republican Democrats are comfortable, and those young people and blacks, they'll come along. They know it's complicated to get people elected, and I think that our inability to like create something that people feel tied to as part of something they want to be successful has left us with no foundation to build from. I mean, honestly, from my perspective, like, if ever there was a need to burn the party down to the ground and just build a new house, it's right now.
Yeah.
Because the foundation is not there. This is like sand. We're basically like, we have a house that's been sinking in quicksand for years. And the current leadership is like, you know, that meme, I'm showing my age, the meme with the guy, the little dog drinking coffee saying it's fine. There's fire behind him.
Oh,
that's the current party of Louisiana. It's like Katie Bernhardt is that dog drinking the coffee as all shit hell is behind her. And it's like, no one buys that. And I mean, just to be more cynical than I'm currently being, look at the donations to the party right now.
Yeah.
That shows you, like, I mean, that shows you, like, I mean, the party also has no money because no one gives a shit anymore.
Yeah. Well, and the money they're getting is from, you know, Entergy or
right. Well, and to be clear, they're giving to both. So when you're getting that sweet commercial money from, like, you know, like Exxon and Energy, they're also giving the same amount, if not more, to the other party. So it's not like you're getting exclusive money. You're getting, like, you know, here's a little side piece money. Like, but when you look at significant high level donors, the party only loses them. We're not picking up replacements. And there was some thought for years that if we become less progressive and more moderate, these traditional moderate Democrats they've all started donating Republican. They just moved on. And rather than, we're not going to lure them back with no messaging. You know what lures back people like that? Winning lures them back.
That's right.
When you're losing, you don't have a lot of friends in a foxhole.
No, because folks like that, if I'm following you, folks like that are really looking to donate to folks who will have some influence.
Correct.
Well, there's no point.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but my point is that like the Monets of the world that are the young, progressives that will be in the foxhole with you because they believe in what you're doing. They don't want to be in a foxhole with someone who's upset they're not getting enough Exxon money. Like if that, I mean, the point is that like this thing needs to be burned absolutely to the ground. We need to begin with building pillars of what the party is going to stand for, and the pillars need to be things that are democratic pillars. And I mean, it's kind of the nature of my personality. Like, not everyone's going to like what those pillars are, but that's compromise. We may have to compromise as a party if that's the decision of maybe we're not absolutely, unilateral New York pro-choicers. Maybe we're the Ohio position of we want everything we had pre-Dobbs and we want rape and incest, but pick something and make that the pillar people can build around. When you look at queer rights, it doesn't have to be. When I talk to older people, it's so interesting because when you talk to them, someone will pull them and go, "Do you like gay people?" They'll go, "No, I don't like gay people." But then you're like, "Do you like government deciding what happens with gay people?" Well, I don't like that either. They leave that part off. A lot of people are just like, "I hate the government and don't want to meddle in anything." That can be a pillar. Doesn't matter whether or not you like queer rights. Do you like the fact the government is deciding winners and losers, and that today it's queer people, tomorrow it could be Catholics, tomorrow it could be anyone else? That could be a pillar you build from. But it just, from my perspective, it's like there are no pillars of the party right now. I mean, even if we had, God, if we would just adopt the national platform, that'd be something, Lynda, but they don't even do that. They're just nothing.
Well, and to me, the party actually has the opportunity to be a little more left or liberal or whatever term you want to use, because if they attract the volunteers and the activists and the small dollar donors, your candidates have a little more freedom then to live in the space that isn't as far left. But if the party can motivate those folks like Monet, that we keep using you as the example.
I've never been so courted in my entire life.
But I mean,
the party should be the place where you're pulling in those folks and getting them engaged, because the liberal, the left folks, the young folks, those are the people who will do the work, who will volunteer, who will come out and support your candidates. And
I think everyone has their capital. And I think that's what people don't realize is that people like me, even though we don't have $5,000 to max out on a donation, we have time. We have the energy to go knock doors. Everyone has something to contribute. It may not be $1, but it might be an hour of phone banking,
which is valuable,
very valuable. Yeah.
But like even with, let's say our platform as a party becomes the Ohio platform, you're not just getting a Monet, you're getting a moderate Republican woman who's like, I don't like the party. Now that post-Dobbs has happened, and I certainly am a college-educated Republican or conservative Democrat woman who votes Republican for fiscal reasons and goes, wait, as Monet said, shit got real. But there's now the contrast. I think we should have died on the Hill at the very least. And the governor, I hate to say it, and I'll say it, he should have come out and went ham on any pro-life bill that didn't have rape and incest exception, because everyone was ready for it, because it was a defensible position, even for pro-life people.
Yeah.
And as governor, he was like, well, I would have preferred if it had it, but I'm going to sign it even though it doesn't. That gutted people. They're kind of like, well, what the F? Like, dude, like, I mean.
And then coming in the next year and saying, wait, actually, we do want those rape and incest exceptions, but sorry, I didn't do it last year.
Right. Or, I mean, just like, but the point is that picking those positions, even the ones that aren't 100% of what you want, but there's a position, it makes people have to decide whether or not you agree with it or whether it's better than what the other person has. The Republican Party not only defines itself, it defines us. And it tells everybody, if you like, I love to tell people who are like, I hate immigrants. Like, I hate immigrants. Now, and I will tell you, as someone who's in the legislature for years, the reason why all of the laws that were proposed regarding, was it e-immigration, with all the electronical surveillance measures that were available nationally to track immigrants, you had several legislators, Neil Reiser, who's a friend of mine, was one of them, who was always like, we need to do more to track immigrants and make it hard for them to get in. And they all died. They didn't die because progressive Democrats ran the day. They died because we have an agricultural state where everyone who works a field is an illegal immigrant. Mm-hmm. And there was never a conversation about where can you do the messaging when it comes to immigration to hit people where they care. But look at Florida right now. Ron DeSantis did all the crazy immigration stuff that other southern states haven't done. And what have you seen? The ag industry is falling apart in Florida.
Yeah.
They can't harvest the shit they're growing. Where was the messaging to say, Jeff Landry has a hardcore immigration agenda? Oh, you're in Jeanerette. Who's going to farm your field? If Jeff Landry wins, who's going to actually do the work? It's like, that's the kind of messaging where, like you said, it's contrast. You hit people where they care. You have disciplined messaging that makes the issue that's important to a Democrat relatable to a Republican. When we did the non-unanimous jury coalition, we got the votes we did because some people messaged it to others saying, you know what? You're pro-gun. Non-unanimous juries are bad for you. And they said, why? They said, because you know what? What happens one day if they pass all those gun bills and someone comes to take your guns and arrest you, and a jury of 10 liberals gets you when those 2 conservatives would have been for you? I mean, that's unlikely, but it put the issue in a mechanism where they could understand and digest it.
Right.
That's good messaging. We haven't had any of that. I mean, there's literally like no, I don't know what they were doing in that war room, Lynda, but it wasn't much.
Well, to your point that Republicans are essentially defining the Democrats right now, when we're not defining ourselves, the fact is they're able to say we're this socialist, evil. I mean, I don't know if you saw Clay Higgins.
I didn't have the heart to watch.
I watch Clay Higgins all the time because he's always on The Daily Show or whatever show's making fun of him. So I don't watch Clay Higgins firsthand, but I do watch people making fun of Clay. And I have seen his crazy John Wayne comments. Yes.
So when we're not defining ourselves enough, that's what we're leaving the space for, is for people like Clay Higgins to tell people who the Democrats are.
Or, I mean, you could say something like, hey, Democrats are pedophiles. And you go, oh, really? Let me list off the ridiculous number of Republicans who have been arrested for touching little kids. Like the fact the party lets people do those kind of comments unchallenged.
Yeah.
The fact that as a party, there's a reason why the Republican Party nationally does a response to every president's speech. What's a Democrat? There's always a response from the party and the minority. To your point, every time you saw something happen bad to people that resonated with people, we should have had messaging when Dobbs got taken down. We should have had messaging to everyone. As Monet said, when shit got real and a whole coalition of different people suddenly gave a shit, we should have been saying, your time is now to show Republicans who you voted for you are unhappy with what they have wrought.
Right.
You do not support what you may have voted Republican for a variety of reasons, but this was not part of the deal you signed up for. And that if you don't make your message known, not only is Dobbs bad, but it's about to get a lot worse, which has gotten worse. We don't do that. And that's like the most basic part of politics. The most basic part is you have to tell people what you're going to do different from someone else. And I mean, looking back at this last cycle, I would say the best candidate this last cycle was probably Dustin Granger.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's because sort of like Devontae, he was constantly saying what bad things Republicans have done and what he would do different. And it's a stark contrast.
Mm-hmm.
And though it's really a race on the margins, that's why he was consistently ahead of the rest of the Democrats. I mean, ultimately, he got 1 point higher than everybody else. But when you look at going into the runoffs, he outperformed everyone else in the state in statewide races.
Sure.
And it's because and the reason that's important is because there were people that voted for no Democrat statewide that threw Granger a vote.
Yep.
That is what people should be looking at right now. Like, wait a second, he did substantially better. In the runoff, it didn't matter because the vote fell off and Republican messaging and money crushed it all. But in that primary, he did significantly better. And he did all that contrasting. Every time he was up on a stage, this is what they did. Here's what I'm going to do. It's so much better for you. This is going to work out better for you. I mean, and I will say this because I've spoken to Dustin. I support Dustin. As much as Katie wants to take a victory lap, Katie didn't have a damn thing to do with Justin Granger's race at all.
No.
They ran around after the rounds. I'm like, oh, our candidates, your candidates, you guys didn't return his calls. Like, this dude did this by himself.
Yeah.
Most of those candidates, even Gwen Collins, Greenup, all of them, they all kind of did their own thing because the party was so fixated on fighting Democrat, like supporting Democrat on Democrat violence. Even in the runoff, these people, they ran off their own messaging. We all saw in New Orleans, the only signs I saw, the only support I saw was from Vote pushing Democratic candidates. I didn't see any unified messaging from the party to turn out New Orleans voters. There's nothing.
There was not. I think, and I said this on Twitter also, but I've told Dustin I was really proud of him. I was proud of the race he ran, but he started early.
I was going to say this. Yes, you did mention this. Yes.
Started 9 months out. He was already on the road. He has a wife and kids that he was willing to go away from. He was willing to talk economics in a way that people could understand. He'd get on those videos and say, like, let me talk to you about how economics works. And it's like, oh, okay. Not only do I understand it a little better, that was actually pretty interesting. You did that in a way that was entertaining to me. And then he really had that message of inclusivity and opportunities for all, so that even though he talked a lot about democratic values, he also really wasn't trying to leave anybody out. And I thought it was a good campaign. It was a good campaign. Very underfunded, just very underfunded.
It was horrendously under. Could you imagine what someone like Dustin could have done if they had taken all the money they wasted on all these little petty antics and actually funded good candidates?
Right. If you can't get mailers to people, if you can't get on your digital ads in front of them on Facebook or Instagram or wherever, if you can't get on TV or do the phone calls or the texting, or all that requires money. And quite likely his biggest hurdle was still name recognition, not having enough name recognition. I know the latest polls or the last polls showed Sean Wilson's biggest hurdle was having no name recognition.
No, the thing is that the challenge everyone had is that because no Democrat emerged early to run for governor, it became an insurmountable hill, which is why I know lots of people that looked at it passed because they were like, if I really wanted to run for governor, I'd have been running a month out. A year out. Like, John Bell was running for governor well before he ran for governor. Right. It declared 18 months out, 2 years out. He declared way out. Yep. And as much people dismissed his race, he put in the time, and he also had 8 years under his belt as a legislator to have a record to run on. And I get really frustrated when I see a lot of candidates in races like that, where it's like they just think because they decide on Tuesday they want to be elected, that everything else will just come. I think a lot of people as candidates, just generally speaking, they don't know how much work has to happen behind the scenes to be a successful candidate. You have to have a plan on how you're going to win before you qualify. And I can't tell you, and I know you will, Monet knows because she does consulting work, you know, because you've run races. Like when Obama decided to run for president, David Plouffe and Axelrod and them already knew how they were going to win. They had to get all the money and the effort and the time, but there was a plan. When Clinton ran and he had Stephanopoulos and he had Carville, they knew what their path was. Now, the path changes as stuff happens, but they knew what the path was. I cannot think of any successful candidate of note who randomly got in a race, ran, and got elected, and either A, was successful or it ended well. The only candidate I can think of locally who pulled that was Ray Nagin. Ray Nagin just jumped in the race randomly. But for some significant explosive implosions of other candidates, he wouldn't have won anyway. He's happened to be there when every other candidate imploded. But he's like the aberration from the rule. But usually, if you're not running a year out, if you don't have a team together saying, here's the plan on how I'm going to win the race, you don't win.
Yeah.
And as a party, we don't do a good job of finding candidates a year out and helping them figure out how to win.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Republicans tend to do a little better, because they have a better farm team. They like, even when there's Republican on Republican violence, and usually it's the conservative taking out the moderate, Dubuison's a great example, and Slidell just got her bell rung, who was not a terrible Republican.
Right.
She had an opponent who lost last time who never stopped running.
Yeah.
And he waited for her to do a couple of those that were unpopular, put together a campaign around it, but he never stopped running. And it's like, we have Democrats that lost last cycle. Gwen Collins Green, a good example. She ran and lost Secretary of State. I have to think she would have done better and the field would have been clear had, if she decided she was running again, she never stopped running.
Yeah.
Because 4 years, no matter how well you did, and she was in the 40s, and she got 41% last time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you have no money, but you're willing to do sweat equity, you can build off of that.
Yeah.
But you can't have 41% show up 4 years later and go, I'm running again, and expect that entire apparatus of people who supported you are just going to appear whole cloth again.
I met with a legislative candidate after qualifying. There's not a whole lot of weeks left after qualifying. And I met with this legislative candidate and I asked them all the questions. Someone asked me to meet with them and help them decide how they could win. I asked all the questions. How much money do you have? Website, volunteer, like what resources do you have available? They were just starting after qualifying to run for a legislative. And I said, my best advice to you, honestly, is to learn what you can in this election cycle. And then in another year, start your next campaign for the next 4 years from now, so that you'll be, because they weren't ever going to get as much money as their opponent was going to get. I'm like, but you could start putting your list together next year of who you might fundraise from. You should start thinking about all the things you should think about. But to your point, sweat equity, right? If you don't have the money to match, start early so you can make up for it in a lot of
good examples. Huey P. Long, he worked the hell out of the state. I mean, it's kind of like we got to go back to our populist roots a bit here.
Right. And there are so many opportunities. I tell people, I mean, you don't have to spend a lot of money to start going to neighborhood meetings and community meetings and joining a lot of groups. People will learn you and know you. Mm-hmm. And that's something that you can start doing if you start doing it early.
Well, okay, let me ask you two quick questions, because we got these two really good questions from some requests, and a lot of them were very specific, so they'll go a different field because they're much more. So these are kind of general, and they're ones that we've also asked candidates when we met. One of them was been a repeat question, which is, I'll give you this one. I have a question from someone who says their spouse is not a native Louisianian, has suggested moving out of state after the election results with no realizations that how Louisiana is not aligned with our ethics. how do you alleviate their concerns? And I'll tell you, that's a question we get in every different format every time we talk politics around, especially after these last couple of cycles. People are just kind of like, they're just demoralized. I think not just with Dobbs, but I mean, you saw with the ridiculous amount of anti-queer bills that kind of came out as a landslide, even with John Bell still being there. This is pre-Landry. A lot of people are just really questioning whether they can survive here. And I say that like very specifically because the reality is there are people like some of us that are going to stay here and try to burn the house down and rebuild it. But there's some people that, especially people who are, I would say, either really older or really younger, who they're scared for their families or they don't want to live here anymore, where it just gets harder and harder on how you try to convince them that things are going to get better. What would your response be to someone who's like struggling with that particular question?
So I hear this and I hear people get upset about, oh, people are leaving and they're mad about people leaving also. You're giving up the ghost and going. My first thing is I always say, if people feel unsafe and they feel like they need to move to feel safe, I will never tell them not to do that. If that's something they feel like they need to do to keep their family safe or keep their sense of comfort, that's on them to decide. But there's every opportunity. Like, we're at a point where there's every opportunity. If you look at the data, if you look at the statistics, if you look at who's in this state, if we get a functional Democratic Party, there's every opportunity to start changing the tides. So if you are going to stay, my advice would be to join the fight, to be one of the people fighting to fix the state. I think that's sort of the options. You can go or you can stay.
I think I would agree with that 100%. I think that if you are someone who is not in a position to be engaged in the change in some shape or fashion, and that you're kind of stuck in a passive position, whether it be by circumstance, whether it be by choice. And to your point, like you're dealing with, I mean, as a married guy with 3 kids, it would be really hard for someone if your wife and kids were like, we don't want to live here anymore. I mean, if you've got a wife, if you're in a same-sex couple, if you have children that are queer, if you have children who just feel like you're in a state that defines how their body can be used or who they can be, it's very hard to stay here unless your motivation for staying is fight.
And can I just say that this isn't just affecting queer children specifically. I have a friend who's a caretaker for children, a 2-year-old that has precocious puberty. It's already developing symptoms of puberty. And because of the recent ban in gender affirming care, they're not able to get an implant that would help regulate their hormones. And so they have to go get shots like every other week to regulate their hormones because of the recently passed laws in the Louisiana legislature. So it's not even just queer children anymore. It's, just children.
Same way that abortion bans impact women who want to give birth, right? That's still helping harming their pregnancies, right?
What I have to remind people of is that we had a multi-year battle over surrogacy and allowing surrogacy, because there was literally messaging from the far right saying, if you can't have kids, God has decided you can't have kids. These are people who were against like in vitro fertilization, against hormone therapy for heterosexual couples that have children, because they felt like the Bible says if you cannot have babies naturally, you just have to be childless. And when you talk about that messaging around controlling bodies and intersocial relationships, it's not just the people who are already marginalized. The grass, the reach is far larger. It always has been far larger than that. It's about like eliminating body autonomy of any shape or form. I mean, some of the bills we saw, I mean, I had this great exchange that Monet found kind of boring, but I thought it was interesting, where I got into a fight with Mike Johnson over his same-sex marriage shit that he had. And he and I got into
I did not find this boring, just for the record. I didn't
find
find
it kind of boring. I thought that was interesting. I had to argue with the future Speaker of the House of Representatives. But I literally, and I am no constitutional scholar, but I was like, all the messaging you're making post the Supreme Court upheld gay marriage was all the same messaging post Lovings. It was all the same language states were doing, saying, well, I know y'all said that people can marry that aren't the same race, but you didn't mean this. And in our argument, he's literally conceding, well, I mean, kind of. And I'm like, you're literally, once you start saying that any pastor has the ability to opine on who should get married, that doesn't just affect gay people. That affects a Muslim and a Catholic getting married. That affects a Black person. And as I was making this argument, he wasn't saying no.
Yeah.
He was saying, well, no one would do that. And I'm like, there are absolutely people in the state right now who are pastors who don't want to marry an interracial couple. And you creating this whole complex litigation system where they could go ahead and do that, you don't get to pick how that's utilized. When you open these doors to allow for discrimination and making people other, you don't get to have someone just say, we just mean the queers. It could be anybody. And yeah, so anyway, sorry, we're going far off that question. Another question.
The other piece I'll say before you move on is that not everyone can afford to move.
Right.
And so I'm sensitive to that as well. And I, my podcast is for progressives. And I say there's sort of three legs to the progressive stool, right? There's like getting progressives or Democrats elected so we can get big sweeping change, having the advocates and the activists to go speak to elected officials so they can be educated on the issues and be pushed to vote the right way. But the third leg really are community groups and nonprofit organizations who are going to help folks who, in the meantime, while we're still pushing for these laws to be better for people, we're going to need folks who are going to, particularly in these next 4 years, possibly 8 years, we're going to need groups who can help support folks who are stuck here because they can't afford to leave. And I think that's going to be a really big, I think that's part of what we really should be active doing. If you don't want to work on a campaign and you don't want to work going to the legislature, beating your head against the wall to push for legislation, there's nonprofit work that can be done to help people here too.
The other question, which is interesting, I think kind of as someone who worked on John Bell's campaign, who believes in climate change, what will the election results mean for the state's coastal program? And which I find incredibly interesting, and just kind of like, as someone who's kind of watching this part of the hellscape from the outside, the amount of money that was poured into the Landry campaign from coastal lawsuit trial lawyers, while also getting money from oil and gas companies, that is going to be kind of hilarious to watch, because you can't both win.
Yeah. Look, I'm deeply worried about that aspect of it, right?
It was interesting because when you look at the Plaquemines race, for example, there was a huge portion of that race that was just revolved around whether or not you support the Barrett area diversion. And the challenge you have is our coastal plan, which was largely funded by BP money, which is running out, which is a multi-generational coastal plan, involves largely diversions to help rebuild the coast. And there is a tension, ironically, not between oil and gas interests, between fishermen, oystermen, and the coast. Because in almost every instance, all the fishermen and oystermen hate diversions, because the sediment flushing down there to rebuild it disturbs the oyster beds where they make their living in the economy.
Right.
Well, on the other hand, if you don't have diversions, the coast isn't going to repair itself.
Right.
And I think what you saw, ironically, from Jindal through line through John Bell was a commitment to, we hear you. We're sorry, but we're doing it.
Yeah.
And during this cycle's the first time where I can tell you, like you, Lynda, I'm very concerned. I think that when we had BP money that was manna from the sky, it was just let the program run itself. It's running out of BP money. It's going to either need legislative money or a new dedication. I know that Senator Landrieu, when she got the oil and gas money down here, part of that agreement was to do coastal work. And we've been fighting to get our fair share of that money to date still. Even though Senator Landrieu sits at the table, we really haven't had a concentrated effort from our delegation to like lock down that money to replace the BP money when it goes away. And I just don't know what's going to happen with the coast, because I think that the legislature, if it has to come up with the cash, they're suddenly going to start picking winners and losers and care about diversions again. They're going to say, well, if I have to vote for that and piss off those fishermen and those oyster guys, because now I'm spending their money, their taxpayer money to fix that diversion, suddenly I do care that it affects affects that oyster bed, because it might affect, my ability to get reelected. I don't know.
Where are they going to live when the coast keeps retreating?
Don't you making the mistake of applying logic to the scenario. I mean, they had a great article about and Norby Schaber is going to kill me when I pronounce this name, Pointe-à-Chen. I'm probably misspeaking that, but there is a point in Terrebonne where there's a whole Native American group of people who just can't live there anymore. Yep. And they took federal money to move them inland. Yep. Now, mind you, it's kind of a mess now, because now you have people who are lower income, who are in the neighborhood and in the housing market. They are displacing them to get their houses and whatever. But the point is that the federal government's already contemplated that, and they've already tried to present money and alternatives to move people from the coast further inland. That is okay when you've got a community of 400 people and you got to move. There is no plan when you've got a city. There isn't. There's never been a plan for what happens when New Orleans has to go inland. That's not contemplated. There's no plan for what happens when Houma has to go inland. Like, the amount of money, effort, and time it would take to relocate that amount of people it's not even like you can't even contemplate it. But on the same token, the same people who live in these environments, in these industries, they live in the areas where they fish. And right. To your point, they're not even contemplating many times when you talk to them, well, where are you going to live when your oyster bed's safe, but your entire town is gone?
Yeah.
And they largely, because politicians sometimes don't want to say it, no one posits that question back to them and says, that if we don't do this, you don't have a community. Right. Usually politicians say, well, I hear you and we're going to take it under advisement. I supported diversions when I represented St. Bernard, and it was very unpopular because a lot of people down there in that industry. But in the same token, sometimes you have to do the right thing, even if it's not the popular thing. But to answer that question, I think Lynda and I and Monet could weigh in too, but I think we're all very concerned, because I would be less concerned if we had infinite BP money to fund the coastal plan and that politicians could just kind of back away and say the plan's the plan. But when that money runs out and the legislature, if they don't find a replacement of funds for it, and they have to start voting on money that goes down there and diverting money to it, I think politics are going to start to come into play again, which could be very dangerous.
Feels like a scary time for Louisiana.
It is a scary time, and it's a scary time. But I think part of going back to the top of the hour and a half is that there is a message people have never learned correctly from the Obama campaign, which is that hope and change are more powerful than scare tactics.
Hard agree.
And it's not just the scare tactics of your opponent doing scare tactics. And honestly, that kind of describes my last campaign too, right, Monet? Like, I was the hope and change and they were the scare tactics. But it also goes towards just motivating people to want to vote, because when both sides are just so negative and it's so terrifying and so scary, and you let your opponent make it seem like you can't do anything better, in a lot of ways, that also helps your opponent, because if they think this doesn't matter, which I mean, part of the name of the game no one talks about in politics is just depressing your opponent's turnout.
Yeah, that's right.
And Republicans did an excellent job this cycle of just making Democrats, a lot of Democrats go, well, what's the point? And I mean, we really did a bad job of getting people to say, there is a point. There is a light at the end of the tunnel if you'll come and trust us with it. And that's not just the message of the campaign. That's the messaging of the party the entire 4 years. Every 2 years, we've got a federal or state cycle. This is when it comes to local municipal races, everything. The party's message has to be consistent, has to have a plan, has to draw the contrast. That's constant. It goes back to, like I said, you have to have a chair of a party and a leadership that aren't politically motivated people that want to run for office or stay in office. You need people that are activists who just want to make the state better. I mean, as much as people think about Stacey Abrams, the gubernatorial candidate, she was Stacey Abrams, the activist, for a long time before then. And as I recall, and I could be wrong, correct me if I'm not, but when she ran for governor, she wasn't chair of the Democratic Party in Georgia.
She wasn't what?
She wasn't chair of the Democratic Party of
That's
Georgia.
Right. Well, I mean, Georgia has, I'm wearing a Georgia t-shirt right now. I mean, interesting to me, when people credit Georgia for the changes that they've made, they don't generally say the Georgia Democratic Party did that, right? I mean, the Georgia Democratic Party has been a source of help, but there are people there already actively doing the work. And so for me, there is a lot of hope in this state because there are already people doing the work. I think the party should be a part of it. It should be part of moving things forward. But you asked a question about people leaving the state. And I think, as I'm thinking about, like Ashley Shelton, who works for the Power Coalition, and one of the phrases she says over and over and over again is, I'm staying in Louisiana because everything I know and love is here. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that a lot of people probably feel for this state.
Well, I mean, and to your point, I think when we talk about getting engaged, we don't necessarily mean with the state Democratic Party, because that would really be, unless we burn that thing down, it's not really worth a lot of your time or money giving to them at all right now. I mean, honestly, I would tell any donor in the state, until we see a complete change in leadership mechanism and a methodology that they could be functional, I wouldn't give this state party a damn dollar. I wouldn't give them a cent. No. But I do think when you talk about different organizations, Together Louisiana, Step Up Louisiana, Lift, all these different groups who are doing things, of the Forum for Equality, they're all these groups that are doing their own things on the margins. That is the potential for a powerful coalition if they could be monetized and supported to be part of the tip of the spear to do that. I think the difference between, because it's so sad, Mississippi, Louisiana, two great examples. We have a tremendously large African-American population, Black population. And as someone who's from that group, I can tell you, when I talk to a lot of people, they just go, what's the damn point? And the fact that we've allowed them as Democrats in these states to feel so marginalized and so put to the side. And we've created a scenario where those numbers don't even matter. Look at Maryland versus us. Maryland is the same population split of African Americans to non-African Americans that Georgia and Mississippi and Louisiana do. But the outcomes in Maryland are very, very different, especially right now. Mm-hmm. I think that with a functional party, with all those different organizations that are issue organizations all working together, you could really have a beautiful coalition to change the trajectory of the state. The problem is when you have those organizations that have to waste money defending Democrats who are being attacked by the party, they're also thinking, what the hell? Like, we'd rather be playing in races. I mean, shit, a Forum for Equality they could be a game changer between a radical and a moderate Republican, for example. And
That's
in states like this, sometimes that's the pick they have to make.
Yeah.
But instead, you have those groups going, I've got to spend money and time defending Democratic incumbents who've done everything right from political reprisal. And it's just crazy to me.
Well, and I always say, while I sing the praises of all those groups and talk about how important they are and talk about that's where my hope lives often right now, the party matters. And so rebuilding the party, getting different leadership and rebuilding it matters, because there are certain funding mechanisms for campaigns that only exist in state parties. And without that, you are really relying on these groups to raise all this money. The party just has different accounts that they can use that nobody else has. So it's a useful tool. It's one of the tools in the toolbox that we should be using to make life better for people here in Louisiana.
Well, I mean, and to that point, like, I know from the House Democratic Party, the Senate Democratic Caucus, it's bizarre to me when you have those groups that are dealing with membership issues inside and they support a candidate. It's so bizarre to me when the party goes the other way.
And they shouldn't. Yeah, they shouldn't.
Because the thing is that they're all eating from the same trough. And what's very sad, the House Democratic Caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, they have more successful fundraising than the party at this point.
Yep.
So when you have that split, you're literally having Democrats just cannibalize themselves. The limited resources you have that should be used to like pick up seats, you had the House Democratic Caucus having to spend money against the party to protect incumbents who voted the right way, which is just insane.
Mm-hmm.
But
yep.
I think that despite all the naysaying that I have seen I've done tonight, Lynda and I could be in agreement that there is a path forward. We just have to have the courage to kind of get on it. And the first part of that is something's got to change at the state party. I mean, and not a little change. I mean, big change. And I will tell you something else that has brought to my attention, and we'll probably go into this in some other podcast. I think it's not appropriate when people who are in party leadership also make money running campaigns and get paid by candidates simultaneously. I think that is a very, very significant conflict of interest.
Yes, absolutely.
Because anyone who is in the party or an employment at the party should not be profiting off of campaigns. Because if you're at the executive level, your primary concern should be using the party apparatus to elect Democrats. And B, if you're getting paid, especially profiting off the Democrat on Democrat violence, that is significantly ethically problematic. Mm-hmm. And I think that there has to be a reckoning with that as well. Even if that is something as simple as saying that there's going to be a change to policy that at the party level, if you're a full-time employee, you can't do this other stuff. Because I think it really just undermines people's ability to believe the party's anything other than a mercenary outfit.
Yeah. And you can pass resolutions, or you can have an executive committee that holds, the chair or director accountable. There are different mechanisms.
And we talked about this offline, but we should hit this before we leave. Just so people who aren't aware of how the party works, obviously there's Democratic Central Committee seats. There are 2 per legislative seat, correct, Lynda?
2 per House district.
Per House district. And the interesting tidbit that you talked about before is that there are parts of the state where no one qualifies. And when someone doesn't qualify, what people don't realize is the board chair basically fills the spots. Mm-hmm. And that creates a scenario, especially in a state where our party is there are many people disinterested in working. It creates a scenario where basically the prime minister gets a crap load of seats that are basically just theirs because they appoint someone to sit in that seat. They're given a proxy, and basically it can create an environment where rather than it being a majority rule, a chairman could start their term with largely 30% of the votes in their pocket because they pick who fills the seats. That is problematic to me, generally speaking. What do you think of that, Lynda?
I think the seats sometimes are difficult to fill. I think it's problematic. The simple answer is yes, it's problematic. The seats can be difficult to fill because there are parts of the state where people don't really want to identify as Democrats, so they don't want to show up on a ballot as a Democrat. But there's probably needs to be a better system or more accountability towards how those seats are filled.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think just from working in various organizations where you have quorum issues, I think that you have to make a decision as to do you have bylaws that leave seats vacant and lower the quorum so that people who actually ran actually are the ones deciding what the outcome? Or do you create scenarios where you create regional leadership where because with OpDec, when there's a vacancy, the council district where there's the vacancy basically elects the person to fill it. So you never have one person going, I like Jimmy. Jimmy's now in that group. You have people who apply to that empty seat, and then that council district, they take a little vote and that person replaces the person. So if nothing else, either there needs to be a change in how quorum is set so that hopefully we build a party that next term someone will want to run for that seat. But I think letting one person or even the executive committee pick that person, you basically have the keys to creating an insulated executive body that has pocket votes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that some reform has to happen there. And I think that if and when the party does switch leadership, one of the first things on the agenda has to be to end that practice. Just because I think that you basically allow a chair of the party, when you're quorum challenged, to pull out a bunch of votes out their pocket and make sure that they win whatever they're fighting over. Especially considering you have a lot of actively engaged DSCC people who have to drive to Baton Rouge to those meetings to try and vote in person versus a chair who could just be sitting on proxies. Also, generally speaking, I know OpDec did something about that recently in a couple of years. You got to really look at whether proxies are appropriate, because proxies get out of hand real fast. If you allow people to give away their vote, especially on a regular basis, you also kind of disincentivize the people who are getting in their car and driving to Baton Rouge to be active if their vote counts the same as someone who never shows up to a meeting. Now, it's one thing if you skip in one meeting, but you can have people that never come to a meeting ever, and their proxy's just there forever.
Oh, and this is a thing that I find should also be fixed. If you ask them which DSCC members are showing up to meetings, they can't tell you because the attendance is not currently digitized. So there's no way to even look at who's turning up to meetings. So if you wanted to say, hey, I want to see if my DSCC member ever shows up to meetings, should I run against that person? Should we find someone to run? You can't really find that information. So that's another piece that probably really ought to. In the Democratic Party, where we try to be a little more transparent and open, we have open meeting laws and we really try to invite people in. That's sort of, to me,
JP, your reaction has been.
I'm literally speechless right now because it's just, you're talking about 210 people. That's 2 for each rep district. Excuse me. Usually, I know during some major events, we meet at the state capitol, right?
Yeah.
Sorry. So you're in a closed room. Attendance is just everyone sign a sheet or do a voice vote to say they're there. And you write it down. And it's done. I mean, you've got little bitty towns that have like a Rotary Club with 7 people who can keep attendance.
They sign in, but they don't have it in a way that you can find that information. It's just on paper.
But
It should, for a state party, that should be a
You
digital.
broke him. You broke him.
Right?
I think you broke my brain. Like I get what you're saying, Lynda, but like first off, you could also just scan the pages
Sure.
and put them up.
Sure.
Now, I would even say with sign in, that is kind of shady because people can sign other people in, which is something people all probably do.
You can also have a little Google form you can
Right,
sign.
but like
right.
but
There's a lot of ways you can
There
fix
are ways.
that.
but
Yeah,
but
there are
the level of disrespect that has for the people that bothered to vote to elect these people.
Yeah.
And the inherent nature of trying to protect incumbency by never showing that someone has never shown up to a meeting. Or even more importantly, I mean, do they even record how people vote?
I don't know how you'd get that information. I don't know how you'd get it.
Like for example, if there was, let's say hypothetically, if I were on the DSCC now, which shoot myself in the head, I might actually consider doing it because something's got to change. But if I put forward a thing saying the chair of the party can no longer have proxy votes from nowhere, and if there was a record of the vote where a majority of the people present voted with me and the chair pulled out her proxy votes and I was defeated by the proxy votes of people who were never there, but you could see who voted how, that would also be part of replacing a chair, saying, well, listen, we're living a tyranny where the chair is supported by phantom votes who never get there. Like, if you're not recording all that stuff, it's hard to make the argument. I mean,
That's right.
That is so bizarre and shady. You kind of broke my brain. My brain literally, like my brain just stopped. I was like, wait, what? Like,
I mean, I understand that in the past, we have the technology now. I mean, it might have been harder in the past, but today we have
that past, Lynda, is like the 1960s. Like, that past is not like the 90s. The 90s, the technology was there. The 80s, the technology was there. I mean, there's some
changes that need to be made. There's some changes.
And I think the challenge that we're all going to have in trying to change the party is that there are people who prefer the system to be this broken and shady.
Absolutely.
And part of the fight is going to be exposing the people who support the shady system. And it might be on the people who are proponents for change to have to actively record it themselves because the party will not do it. So, I mean, as honestly, the elections for DSCC are this spring, right?
March 23rd, the same ballot as our presidential preference primary.
Right. So, honestly, it's going to take a significant level of organization just to, I think that a lot of effort needs to go into a statewide campaign to push mad as hell people to actually go qualify for DSC.
Okay.
What's the cost?
Lynda has been doing that, to her credit. She has been. I've seen you out here with the Zoom saying we need people to run for DPAC and DSCC. Like, come join us.
How much is the qualifying fee for DPAC?
$112.50, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. I mean, it could be as that in itself can be a hurdle to a lot of people.
Sure.
We really might want to consider trying to figure out, and so that Monet and I could talk about, like, maybe seeing if we could find third parties that just want to put up a fund for anyone who wants to qualify and paying the fee.
There is no campaign finance there are no campaign finance reports for party seats.
Right. So, I mean, because I could tell you there are probably a lot of people that would run, but if you're working paycheck to paycheck, $112 is like your rent or your, God forbid, if you live in a one bedroom apartment, maybe like your water and energy bill. Probably your energy bill. It was probably higher than that. But
I've heard from folks that they're willing to put up money for
I think
qualifying or campaigns or whatever.
I think what we should all be working towards is having a fund set up for people who money does not go in your hand to go qualify for you, but write the check and say, here, we'll put it in there to qualify for you. But like, we should try to overcome every hurdle possible to having the maximum amount of people run for central committee seats, because the there was a time when I was younger in my first race, 2006, where I fought tooth and nail at every opportunity to get the endorsement of the party over everything else because it meant so much to me. And I still like OpDec. I have a lot of friends on OpDec. But there are times where in recent history, the party decided to weigh in on Senate and House seats to try and override OpDecs at times to push their own candidates. I think people don't understand the power of the state party.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to return that power to actual regular people who just care about the fate of Democrats. And I think we talk about the issue we talked about tonight, like having a platform on something to do with queer people, having a platform on something to do with abortion. If you don't have a central committee that gives a shit, that wants to force that issue, you just don't have anything. And I think that the party, the reason why it's been so inactive is because you've got a lot of people at the DSCC level that they like going to the convention every 4 years. And they're all people I've talked to. I mean, older people who've been on the for years, and like that's the victory they get is they get to go to the central.
Just to clarify, you have to run separately to go as a delegate.
I know, but it's a step towards doing it.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, like, it's just, I think you have to care about the daily plight of Democrats and the Democratic platform of the state of Louisiana to run for DSCC, and we need to return to that if it was ever there. I mean, honestly, like, I've honestly never been on the DSCC. I've never really had any interest in being on DSCC because honestly, to be fair, and you're a better person than I am, Lynda, I just saw from the outside, and I was like, man, these party politics are so messy. They're so messy. And it's so personal, and it's so messy, and it's so messy. And I was never motivated that any part of the party platform resonated with me because it seemed like they didn't stand for much. And I guess from my perspective, having seen this last cycle, people like me are kind of part of the problem because people who are from the outside see how messy it is. We never made an effort to try and go in and fix it. We just said we can work around it. And what this cycle showed is, to your point, no matter how many organizations we have working on the outside, you kind of need a central apparatus, even because of the resources it can have. When people want to fund issues, they typically go from the national level through the party.
Yeah.
And when you have a dysfunctional party, you really disincentivize groups from sending money down to candidates through the party. Okay. And it's really hard for a candidate, let's say in rep seats, to get, there's no way for this national person to know that person exists. They'll fund several candidates that are pro-choice, but they're not going to take the effort to hunt down which candidates in the state are the pro-choice candidates. They rely on parties for that. And if they're not doing it, we're just missing that opportunity.
So I want to say to you, JP, that if you do decide to run for DSCC, please let me know. There are folks across the state that are tracking this so we know what seats people are signing up to run for, because there's no runoff in these races. So whoever wins the seat on March 23rd gets the seat. Or if you run unopposed, you don't even have to go on a ballot. You just win outright, like any seat, right? But if there's more than one candidate, whoever gets the most votes on March 23rd.
That is how my dad lost his DSCC seat.
Yeah.
Because there's 3 people on the ballot. And it was funny because the guy afterwards was like, hey, I really liked you. I would have voted for you. I'll vote for you in the runoff. And my dad was like, there is no runoff. And the guy was like, my bad. And it's like, I think that it's sometimes you have to educate people. It's sort of like the presidential election. There's not a runoff if person with most votes wins. So it's like you have to educate people that when you're running, you're not running for the runoff. You're running to win because it's a one person takes all.
Right. So if you have a person who's going to vote for Katie Bernhardt again versus one person who's going to vote for something new, we don't want 2 people who want to elect someone new because you're more likely.
And I will tell you, I'm in DSCC 97.
Okay.
If there is somebody else who's a regular person that is really committed to like changing the party, I'm not dead set on this. If there's somebody, I mean, honestly, I've been a proponent, and Monet knows this. I talk about it way too much. I really think party leadership is an opportunity for people who have not engaged to cut their teeth. So whether it's op deck seats, whether it's DSCC seats, this is the opportunity for people who are really passionately want to rebuild the party. You should run. I'm dissatisfied with leadership. So in the absence of someone running, I will run. But at the same time, like if there's some young person out there or old person who really is really committed to rebuilding the party, I would happily support someone who wants to do that. And I'm looking for that. And like, to be clear, in every seat in New Orleans, I'm looking for people who want to rebuild the party. And as far as I can be involved in these small level seats, I'm going to be involved trying to help people who want to change the outcome of the party, because I'm done with the way things have been being done. And I think that, to your point, it might be I don't run for anything. I just help raise money for a fund to pay for the filing fees for random people to run. Maybe that's what I do.
I'll look up on, we've got a bunch of different spreadsheets that people are adding to, but I'll look that up. But what we've done so far is, because I'm not trying to be kingmaker or queenmaker.
Right.
If there's more than one person wanting to run for a seat, I've basically just said, can y'all go have a conversation and decide which one of you should run? And so that's the kind of conversations that are happening now. So I'm all about the conversations.
That's excellent, because I guarantee you the people that are running, because our default is jungle primaries, many probably do not realize that it's majority wins, not I get into a runoff and then I get a second shot. So that could be part of the education process. And I'm happy to work with Monet, Lynda, with you to put together maybe even some graphics or a video explaining qualifying for DSCC, as well as like that there is no runoff. Like if you're running and you get 33%, someone gets 30%, someone gets 37% or whatever, 37% wins. So do not run for a runoff. And if you have two candidates that both want the same thing, you could both screw each other. And the person you don't want to win could win. So there has to be conversations, but also if we can start putting money together for those people that want to run, I mean, you're talking about basically $225 per seat at minimum to make sure there's someone qualifies for each possible seat. Because what that'll do is, for those seats we've been talking about in the parts of the state where no one has ever run, having a fund that pays for qualifying could finally get you someone to run in that seat, because they'll go, it's a free shot. I can just, someone will pay for it. So I think a body could be there. I would rather have someone who's thinking about it run than a chair pick positions, because then you're just getting someone, the chair just gets a vote.
Yeah. Fair.
All right. Well, that's exciting. So if you're listening to this podcast, we're going to work with Lynda and other people to make sure that we heavily advertise the lead up to it on a statewide level. We'll even see maybe if we can get some funding to do some ads or something, some Google ads, something out there to try and promote it. Just, I mean, it would be tremendous and amazing if we could get a whole generation of new people who've never been engaged to go, I could do that.
I love
that.
It
would really change the outcome of the party in the state.
It would. Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else, Monet, unless you do.
I think we've run the gambit of it.
I think we have.
We talked it all.
Well, we and to be clear, we didn't touch on unions because we're talking to a union soon. So we're going to talk to them about all the union stuff.
Yes. So
yes.
Exciting stuff.
Exciting stuff.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you ever want me to come back on the Lefty, I'm always available to come on the Lefty and talk about Lefty stuff.
The Lefty.
And then we can get a whole bunch of hate on Twitter from all the conservatives who blame everything that happens in Louisiana on the lefties. It's a lot of people on Twitter that blame us for everything because
I've been seeing more of that lately, in fact.
Well, I mean, when you have Elon Musk literally endorsing replacement theory and anti-Semitism and being like, yes, this is true, blame the Jews for everything, you can't be surprised this platform is kind of reflects him. So, I mean, we will post at the bottom of this video where you can follow us on all social media platforms, because there are alternatives to X and people should try them out, because someday it will die and hopefully something better will sprout up in its place. I mean, that's all we can all hope for.
Yeah.
Maybe not Threads, because Threads is also kind of anti-Semitic and kind of evil, but maybe something else.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out eventually.
We'll figure it out. All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thanks so much, Lynda.
Thanks, Lynda.